What's the fastest you've seen a couple go from married to divorced after a shocking secret came out? A female friend married a man who claimed to work in money management, but he was always vague about his actual job. He drove a nice car, owned a house, and left every morning in a suit and tie, returning around dinner time. She lived with him for 6 months before the wedding. They got married, went on a honeymoon to France and Spain, and when they returned, he was arrested as soon as they got off the plane. Turns out he'd been selling large quantities of drugs to white-collar businessmen and spending the rest of the week at local casinos claiming to be at work. When the feds searched their house, they found over $250,000 worth of drugs and more than $2 million in cash hidden there. Once it was clear she had no idea what he was involved in, she filed for divorce within 48 hours. Story 2. So, at a wedding reception, the groom and the maid of honor slipped away to have a little private fun, only to walk in on the bride giving the best man a blowy. The best man and maid of honor were close friends of the couple and married with young children. Adding insult to injury, the bride had refused to be intimate with the groom until marriage, holding out because he was wealthy, and she was a gold digger. She had met him in college while pursuing an undergraduate degree and was essentially looking for a wealthy partner. Even worse, the groom had earned all his money as the top salesman at the best man's company, which sold advanced optical microscopes. It was a small company with only a few salespeople, and the groom consistently generated more than double the sales of the next best salesperson. When the groom left, the best man begged him to stay, but he refused. After his departure, the company fell into serious trouble and eventually went under. Both marriages ended, and the bride fought the annulment because she wanted the money. It turned out she was pregnant with the best man's baby. She pretended it was the groom's, successfully derailed the annulment, got a divorce, and received child support for a while after the baby was born. The groom went broke trying to get custody of the baby out of spite. The best man went broke when his company folded, and both women, best friends in college before getting involved with these two, arranged a three-way sugar daddy setup with an older wealthy man and lived happily ever after, collecting child support and making these two men's lives an absolute nightmare. The groom eventually took his own life, and the best man became a hardcore alcoholic. Story 3. I film weddings just to earn some extra cash on the side and buy cool cameras. One couple I met got engaged, married, and divorced all within the year 2017. They got engaged on a skiing holiday in early February and planned the wedding for July, right in the middle of the busy wedding season. They contacted me 4 months before the wedding, so I charged a late booking fee. I like to get organized several months in advance to avoid potential problems. They got married, and 2 weeks later, after I had finished the extensive editing process in my spare time, the bride told me she didn't want the videos because they were getting a divorce. It turned out she had walked in on the groom doing it with a bridesmaid in their apartment just 4 days after the wedding, so technically they were married for less than a week. Has to be some kind of world record, right? I still got paid in full, and rather than let the videos go to waste, I sent copies to the parents of both the bride and groom, hoping they would keep them safe for the future. Story 4. I went to a wedding where the bride got drunk, and the groom picked up her phone and discovered she had been texting a coworker throughout the entire wedding. He told the officiant not to file the paperwork. The reception itself was great. Edit. This happened at the end of the reception as they were leaving for the honeymoon suite. The bride was very drunk, and her phone kept receiving notifications, which led him to check it. They did not go on their honeymoon and returned all the gifts. Guests weren't informed of what happened for a couple of weeks, as the bride was trying to save the relationship. I don't know the legal details regarding the nuptials not being submitted to the city clerk. Story 5. A relative of mine had a marriage that lasted less than 3 weeks. They had been together for a couple of years and even attended premarital counseling at their church for several months to prepare. Their wedding was lavish, reflecting significant time and money invested, and they announced they were expecting their first child. Everything seemed perfect. Unfortunately, the marriage fell apart when the wife discovered he had been cheating on her for nearly their entire relationship with multiple women. She found out while in a foreign country on their honeymoon, 4 months pregnant. According to her mother, she experienced complications in her pregnancy, which were attributed to the stress of this situation. Story 6. 2 weeks. They were people from my college. I didn't know him personally, but I knew her. From what friends told me, he was a genuinely great guy, but nobody I knew, except her terrible boss, ever had a kind word for her, and for good reason. She was bigoted, arrogant, demanding, manipulative, and overall, one of the least pleasant people I've ever met. After about a year of dating, she convinced him to marry her. He, blind to her manipulations, agreed, because he loved her. Just 2 weeks after the wedding, he realized how controlling, self-centered, and conniving she was. She would criticize everything: his weight and fitness, not that she was exactly a 10 herself, his income, she contributed nothing, and even his performance in bed. Rumor has it, she sighed loudly during their wedding night and said, "I married a third grader." He promptly contacted a lawyer and divorced her. Good for him. Story 7. My neighbor got married at 19 and divorced at 20. Her parents divorced while she was dating the guy, and she moved in with him a couple of months into the relationship. They had been together less than a year before getting married. Being such a young couple with so little time together, it hardly worked out. She didn't learn her lesson, though, and got engaged to someone else barely a year later. They called it off before getting married. Sadly, that's considered the happy story in the family. Her younger sister got pregnant at 16 by a man in his 30s, and a couple of years later became pregnant by him again and married him. He's currently in prison for essaying a girl. It happened while they were together, but they're still married with 2 children, and she defends him on Facebook all the time. Story 8. A girl I went to high school with has 4 children from her first marriage. They divorced when they were in their early 40s. She decides she wants to get married again and is looking for a religious, family-oriented man, convinced that Nigeria is the place to find him. She starts chatting with Nigerian men on Facebook, travels there, and marries a man she just met through her online husband search. After a few months while she's back home, she's unable to send him money one month because she has 4 kids to take care of. He freaks out, and they end up getting the marriage annulled. But wait, there's more. A year later, she's on her way to Nigeria again because she's found another man to marry. This time, she visits once, comes home, and basically says, "I am not giving you money until we marry." Within 6 months, she goes back to marry him. A month after returning home, she discovers she's pregnant. Everything seems fine at first, but eventually she can't send him money because she has 4 children and twins on the way, which take priority. He gets upset, and they end up divorced. Later, she finds out he had been chatting with other women around the world, collecting money from them, and was only planning to use her for a green card to come to the United States. I honestly don't feel bad for her. I feel bad for her 6 children having to witness their mother make such reckless decisions. No idea how she could afford all those plane tickets. She's given up on Nigeria now, and Jamaica is her new target. Pretty sure it won't be long before we see a shotgun wedding there. Story 9. About a month. A girl at my work had been in a relationship for 8 or 9 years. She slept around, and he just put up with it. They decided to get married, though apparently everyone except them knew it was a horrible idea. Maybe it was his last effort to make her take the relationship seriously. Roughly a month later, she came to work and told me that during a party he got up, killed the music, and shouted, "We're getting a divorce." I guess the 4 guys at our Christmas party made him realize there was no changing her. Took him long enough, but good on him. Story 10. I went to training with a guy who was head over heels for a woman named Casey. She was a train wreck and used him to boost her self-esteem. She kept putting him off, saying she wanted to wait until marriage before she got intimate, even though she would sleep with anyone else who asked. He decided to enlist and asked her to marry him. She said yes and proceeded to plan an extravagant wedding, running up his debt because he wanted to make her happy. The wedding day arrived, and it was sadly beautiful. At the kiss, she turned her head, so he ended up kissing her cheek. The reception was awkward. He with his family and friends. She drinking with her friends because she didn't have any family, or so she said. The evening ended, and they went to their hotel. I went home and planned to sleep for just a few hours before getting a phone call saying she had locked herself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out. I told him to let her be. She'd had a lot to drink, and deal with it in the morning. The wedding was on a Saturday. She refused to come out of the bathroom on Sunday until he left the room, and then she left him that Sunday night. She seemed to just disappear. 2 weeks later, he got a phone call from her saying she wanted a divorce and that he could contact her at her mother's address. My friend was left with all the debt and a broken heart. Thank God his brother never filed the marriage certificate. Story 11. I knew a couple who split up just 3 weeks after getting married and finalized their divorce within 2 months. Backstory: they had been together for several years. The guy spent a lot of time away at work, but she insisted she was fine with it, even calling the situation ideal. Then one day, he came home, got down on one knee, and proposed. She said yes because, in her exact words, why not? Throughout their relationship, she had been especially close to a particular male friend, whereas you would almost never see her with her partner. There was hardly any evidence of him in her life. She and her male best friend were seen together at nearly every social occasion. They appeared so close and well-matched that most people who met them assumed they were a couple. They constantly insisted there was nothing going on between them. As the wedding drew closer, she and her fiancé planned a lavish wedding and reception, inviting hundreds of people. Up until this point, her fiancé had tolerated her extremely close friendship with the guy, because whenever he questioned it, she accused him of being paranoid and sexist. Immediately after getting married, she changed her Facebook profile picture to one of her hugging her best friend. When her husband questioned it, she refused to take it down. They argued about the photo, and just 3 weeks after getting married, they split. Almost overnight, she hooked up with and began a relationship with her best friend. Story 12. A bride got into a car right in front of the church in tears, crying about wanting a divorce. They'd been married for mere minutes. I know this because the minister, who was furious, explained it to my mom. She was helping with church matters. He said this is exactly why rehearsals, meetings, and counseling exist for people who might be skittish. You go over the wedding multiple times with him because a sudden change of heart like this is stressful and toxic for everyone involved, not least the church, which is trying to uphold the sanctity of marriage. Apparently, the groom sprang the marriage question on her and used social pressure from friends and family to get her in front of the altar. She only realized after the ceremony that she really didn't even like him. Good on her for not wanting to live a lie, but maybe this realization could have come a few hours before the wedding? By that point, everyone is already heavily invested. She made the right choice for herself, but the timing was brutal. Story 13. My sister-in-law, who's pretty redneck, decided to marry her even worse boyfriend, despite his history of verbal and physical abuse toward her. The big day came, and they were set to marry in a dingy little park. They hadn't officially reserved it, though. They tried and were denied. According to them, the denial was because of a racist parks official. Their words, not mine. In reality, the park was closed for serious construction and was a mess. It rained that morning. Poured. They had no backup location. The few of us who showed up watched from our cars while they huddled under the park gazebo. The groom arrived late, stone drunk, and to top it all off, the woman he was having an affair with was parked nearby, watching the entire spectacle. The couple never bothered to get a marriage license despite the JP's instructions. She went ahead with the ceremony anyway, but was clear that they weren't officially married until they filed for it on Monday. The reception was held in my in-laws' driveway, a buffet lunch with a DJ. The groom completely lost it over the music, which he hadn't even paid for. He stormed out yelling, "Screw this, screw that, screw her." Literally exactly that. Along the way, he flaunted his affair to the bride and even threatened some of the guests. He peeled out in his pickup, briefly getting stuck in the mud. The next morning, when my sister-in-law tried to make amends, she found him in bed with his mistress. As for the guests, they were honestly relieved to see him leave. The general sentiment was that the whole wedding had been a mistake, and the party carried on after he stormed out. Story 14. Some friends who had been dating for a few months got married in Las Vegas as a sort of drunken joke. The bride discovered she would lose a large portion of her trust fund if they remained married. 4 lawyers were flown in and quickly secured a retroactive annulment. The marriage lasted 4 days, though legally it was declared never to have existed. They dated for 3 more years before ultimately breaking up. Story 15. My wife's family's neighbor's daughter got married and threw a huge wedding bash, spending $50,000 to $70,000. Not even 2 weeks later, she got divorced. She had been cheating on her husband throughout the engagement, but still insisted on having her special day. I later heard that she had even asked her mother if she would have to live with her husband after they got married. Story 16. My own marriage in 2004. I kissed my wife goodbye for a 3-month deployment to Pakistan in March. I never saw her again. After being there for 2 months, she told me she wanted to leave me. At the time, there was a loophole in divorce law that one website was exploiting, QuickSimpleDivorce.com. Lawyers in Guam were allowed to process uncontested divorces fairly quickly. I paid $800, sent her the paperwork. We were living in Germany at the time, and she signed it and left for the United States before I got home. The divorce was finalized in August 2004. What caused it? I don't really know. Honestly, she had been unhappy before my departure. We'd only been married a couple of years, and we kind of rushed into it in 2002 when I got orders to Germany. Story 17. The actual divorce has to wait because of visa issues, but basically, they got married. Everything was fine at first, and then about a month later, she started getting strangely quiet about their relationship. About 9 months after the wedding, he told her he thought of her like a sister. It was a holiday romance, followed by several years of long distance, filled with countless red flags. The moment they moved in together, things went downhill. He did nothing around the house. She earned all the money and paid for all of his expenses on top of that, and he even squandered her money despite her asking him not to. She actually had to put a limit on his phone contract. I don't think he planned to leech off her. He's just an inconsiderate a-hole. They're waiting it out because she's too nice to send him away. Story 18. How about the bride who pushed her new husband off a cliff on day 8? When people noticed he wasn't around, she notified the police. Then, when they started searching and asking questions, she sent an anonymous email from Joe the plumber, using her parents' computer, claiming he was dead. When the investigation didn't stop, she led a search and rescue party directly to his body, claiming God had guided her to the spot. At the funeral, she seemed relieved, and guests heard her say she was glad the police didn't have to be involved anymore. Eventually, she concocted a story about it being an accident and finally confessed to everything. They hadn't even consummated the marriage. Story 19. A young couple in their late 20s, the bride, was the daughter of a friend. She had never learned to budget, save, spend wisely, pay bills on time, or prioritize. Both worked full-time at good jobs in San Francisco and lived in a purchased condo in Pacific Heights. That was quite nice. She ran them into a ton of debt, always needing the very latest material things, clothing, furniture, you name it. She could put $1,000 on their credit card in an hour on absolutely nothing. She nagged her husband from the moment he walked in the door from work, even in front of company. It lasted 2 years, and he couldn't get away fast enough. Their wedding photos were hilarious. No smiles anywhere. Story 20. When I was in the Army, my ex-wife and I were good friends with a couple who lived a few doors down from us. One day, I got home from work and found him sitting on his front doorstep. I said, "Hey," and he replied, "Dude, you gotta come see this." I walked into his house, and it was completely empty. Every cabinet door was open, the refrigerator door open, every drawer open. If it was supposed to be closed, it was open. Every faucet was running. The front door had been left wide open when he got home. No note, nothing. His wife was just gone, along with everything in the house. The strange part was my ex-wife and I had dinner with them at their house the night before, laughing, drinking wine, having a great time. There was no sign anything was wrong. He said the first thing he did was call her parents' house. Her father answered, and before he could even ask what was going on, the father said, "Bill, you need to let it go," and hung up. Remember that line from True Lies when Tom Arnold says his ex-wife even took the ice cube trays? Well, she took the ice cube trays. She also took all of his uniforms and other clothes. He literally had only the clothes on his back and what was in his pockets to his name. I never did find out what the motivator was. She was just gone. Story 21. I knew a couple who did the whole, "I don't know if I can make a commitment like getting married to you, but having 2 kids with you is no big deal" thing. After a couple of years, they finally tied the knot. A few months later, her Facebook status was back to single. He was a massage therapist and had 3 girls on the side that he was meeting for their night massages because she worked all day and couldn't come in then. Story 22. A friend of mine worked for her husband's brother. That's how they met. Once they got married, her boss stopped paying her because she was family now, and you don't have to pay family. She quit and immediately found another job without consulting her husband. In a fury, her husband changed all the locks while she was asleep in the back bedroom and put deadbolts on the outside of the door so she could only leave if he let her out. He also took her cell phone. They didn't have a landline. It took her about 2 hours to reach us online. The dumbass didn't think she could contact anyone via laptop. We called the police, who busted down the door and got her out. Her husband went to prison, her divorce went through real quick, and now, 5 years later, she lives on the coast and is engaged again to a very sweet guy who knows we're all watching like hawks. Story 23. My boyfriend's cousin, she's 21 and dating a 19-year-old who looks 12 and is very small. She is a much larger woman and extremely physically abusive. I watched her pick him up and lock him in the trunk of a car by sitting on top of it to induce a panic attack and win an argument at work. He always has bruises and black eyes. After a few months of dating, he proposes, and they get married. The next day, he annuls the marriage and leaves in secret, going into hiding for 6 months. She posts lots of woe is me sappy breakup stuff online. Somehow, out of nowhere, he comes back. They remarry at the courthouse, and now she says she's pregnant, but isn't telling her family. Her husband looks miserable and, according to the grapevine, doesn't work anymore and is confined to the apartment they share. Whether that's by choice or not is up for debate. The poor guy looks like a withered husk of himself, and he's only 19. Edit. For everyone saying we are awful people for not helping him, are you insane? Of course we've reached out. We've confronted the wife, begged the husband to leave, called the cops, and given him shelter and resource information. He is over 18. Calling the cops does nothing because he lies to them. They can't arrest his abuser just because I say a crime is happening. He has to admit he's in danger and either press charges or want help leaving. He won't do that. Our hands are legally tied. Until he's ready to seek help, all of us are keeping an eye on him. And no, the cops aren't doing nothing because he's a man. This happens to women too. If you are a woman and I call the cops saying you are being abused and you tell them you are not, they also do nothing because the victim of the crime is denying it occurred. Story 24. One of my high school classmates married her boyfriend before graduating college. She was the type of girl who had her entire life planned, so we were a little surprised she didn't wait to graduate, but he seemed perfect, so it made sense. He was intelligent, motivated, sweet, and thoughtful. He would come over on weekends to mow her lawn, do small repair jobs, and take out the trash. Their courtship was perfect, the proposal beautiful, and the wedding was talked about for weeks. 6 months later, we went out for a girls' night and begged for details about her married life. Since she was the first of us to get married, she broke down. He had just stopped. Everything he had done before the wedding disappeared. It was like he had stopped adulting and reverted back to childhood. He would eat only spaghetti and chicken nuggets, skip classes, cut his work hours to less than half, do no housework or yard work, and spend entire nights playing video games with his best friend. So much so that the friend complained. The drama intensified, and they were divorced before their first anniversary. Story 25. They had a roughly $100,000 wedding at a beach resort, attended by close family and a few friends, followed by an expensive reception at home with everyone else. They lasted about a year, had a child, and then the groom developed a drug addiction, which prompted an immediate divorce. An ex-girlfriend of mine was divorcing her husband, whom she had married at 17. I didn't know this until a few weeks into our relationship. She was 19 at the time. After I broke up with her, she started dating a man in his 30s, got pregnant, and they eloped. 7 to 9 months into that marriage, and 1 to 3 months after the birth of her baby, she divorced him for another man and gave him primary custody so she could go out and party. Story 26. 8 months after the wedding, they separated, and another 4 months later, the divorce was finalized. They had been engaged and living together for 5 years before marrying in August. They bought a house in December, mostly because he was really pushing for it. After moving in, he immediately started referring to the empty bedroom as the nursery. She wasn't ready for a child, but figured they'd get there eventually. Then some major differences in their expectations surfaced. He expected her to become a stay-at-home mom soon, while she planned to continue building her career. He wanted financial control over the household and even lied to her about their bills, whereas she expected to be an active partner in their financial future. By March, she had cheated on him and moved out of the house. The paperwork for their divorce was finalized before what would have been their first wedding anniversary. She and the man she cheated with got together immediately and eventually bought a house together. A few years later, they got married. She has become a great stepmother to his children and has been able to build her career. She's even working on a master's degree now. She and her ex were both difficult, but he was worse. They are both better off apart. Story 27. My second husband changed completely after we got married. He had made a lot of effort in the relationship before we were married, but as soon as he got me, things changed. He'd say things like, "Whoa, why would I spend 10 pence to text you during the day when I'll see you at home tonight?" The biggest issue was that we had agreed I would continue working full-time while he went part-time and attended night school to help with childcare after the birth of our daughter. We had also agreed to look for a bigger house after the baby was born. About 3 months in, he grew tired of this arrangement, went back to full-time work, gave up night classes, and left me literally holding the baby. I had no choice but to give up my job and take a position with more child-friendly hours, which meant we couldn't afford a bigger home since I had earned more. Everything we had agreed on as a family while pregnant and planning the marriage, he went back on. He was the one who pushed for the baby. I agreed on the basis that he would be the primary caregiver, but he changed his mind. He broke all his promises and set my career back 10 years while I raised my daughter single-handedly. I'm a nurse, and I couldn't manage without childcare for my shift pattern, which he knew. He would often fail to show up to pick up the baby, and I had to phone in sick. And some men complain that their exes don't let them see the kids. I didn't need maintenance money. I needed my child cared for so I could work. I ended up with neither. Oh God, that turned into a rant. We're good now. Remarried to a good man, my child is almost grown, and I'm back to nursing full-time. Story 28. We used to have a weekly movie and game night with 2 straight couples, plus my partner and me. Both couples had children and seemed perfectly content with each other. One night, while we were having dinner before the movie, the wife of the first couple got up to go to the restroom and left her phone unlocked on the table. At some point, the conversation turned to something cute their child had done that day, and the husband picked up his wife's phone to show us a video in the photo app. The phone was full of dozens of explicit photos of the husband of the second couple. Shocked and unsure what to do, the first husband simply turned the phone around to show the whole table, just as his wife returned from the restroom. There was a long silence as everyone processed what had just happened. The other couple's wife quietly stood up and said they needed to leave immediately. No more words were exchanged beyond a few mumbles. My partner and I also left as quickly as possible. Both couples separated within a few days and divorced shortly thereafter. The 2 star-crossed lovers briefly dated, but their relationship also ended a few months later for unspecified reasons. Story 29. We know a really good guy, one of those incredibly handy, always willing to help, never says a bad word about anyone, who was nearing retirement from his job as a contractor and looking forward to his pension. We also know a scummy acquaintance, slightly older than him, twice divorced. When they met, it was immediately clear he was going to try to fix her and her family, not in an obnoxious or pushy way, but because he's the reluctant hero in every story. They were probably together for around 2 years. The moment he finished his retirement party, she served him papers. The crazy part is that he had been such a good father figure to her mostly grown daughters that one of them chose him to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. He didn't deserve that treatment, but in the end, the situation probably would have been too much for him anyway. Story 30. 4 days. Friends of mine had been together for 15 years. They seemed to have a normal, healthy relationship with the usual ups and downs, but nothing to suggest they were close to breaking up. As many of you know, a long-term relationship can replace the initial lust and excitement with mundane day-to-day routines, and maybe petrol station flowers for Valentine's, or not. I suspect they felt getting married would give their aged relationship a jump start. We went to the wedding on Friday, and everyone was really happy. By early the next week, they annulled it and broke up. They were very matter-of-fact about it, and neither seemed devastated. To be fair, everyone else was probably more hurt than they were. Story 31. My mother met a man while he was on holiday, and they started seeing each other roughly every other weekend. After 3 months, they got engaged. The whole family told her she was being ridiculous, but she wouldn't listen. 6 months after the engagement, they had the wedding. At the time, her new husband still lived in another country, and the most time they had spent together continuously was maybe 3 days. In total, they had only spent about 1 to 2 months together over the course of their relationship. After the wedding, it took another 3 months before he moved in with her. Within 6 months, he had moved out, and they were divorced not long after. The entire relationship, marriage included, lasted no more than 18 months. And this is why you never marry someone you've never lived with, kids. Your whole relationship changes once you cohabit. Story 32. I was married at 18 for exactly 10 days before getting a divorce. We had dated for 3 months prior to that. About 3 days before the wedding, he decided it was a good time to steal his roommate's identity and credit cards. Suddenly, I had a really nice wedding ring. He had a Camaro. We were looking at houses, and he was decking me out in expensive clothes. We went out partying every night and stayed in hotels. It was every sheltered 18-year-old girl's dream, until things didn't start adding up. Until he started sending me to the car while he paid for everything. Until I heard someone calling him by a different name in a bar, but it was loud, so maybe I misheard. Until he got increasingly sketchy every night, bouncing between multiple hotels and bars. Then came the run-in at a hotel, with the owner screaming, freaking out, and threatening to call the cops. He said it was no big deal. The guy was just crazy. We went out partying, and when we left, the cops chased us. For hours. I kept asking for answers, and got none. Until, finally, around 4 a.m., on the beach, exhausted, cops surrounded the car, handcuffed me, and asked what I knew about my husband and his identity theft. Story 33. About 3 hours. Okay, that isn't technically true, but here it goes. 2 years after graduating high school, a friend of mine in the Marines was set to deploy overseas and decided to marry the girl he had been dating since our junior year of high school. He proposed on a Monday, and the next day they got married at a courthouse. They then told everyone they were engaged and set a date for a month later. It wasn't a big or expensive wedding, so it was easy to put together on short notice. I was invited along with a few other friends from school and a bunch of other Marines I'd never met. The ceremony was nice, lasting about an hour, followed by another hour and a half for pictures and food. It was a very pleasant, sweet little wedding. Shortly after the wedding, the couple checked into a motel for their honeymoon, and the new wife revealed that she was pregnant and that her husband might not be the father. Apparently, she had rushed the marriage thinking it would stop Brian from leaving her once he found out, but she was wrong. He immediately began paperwork for an annulment, and although it took a long time to finalize, things ultimately worked out in his favor. Story 34. My uncle took about a year for them to get engaged and roughly a year for them to divorce, if that. My uncle is a good guy. His first marriage didn't end well, and he wanted a family. Along came this leech within the fire department, half his age. They ended up falling for each other and got engaged quickly. They were supposed to have the wedding the following year, but they cut that in half and got married at the courthouse by themselves sooner. The woman was sketchy the entire time. She had 2 previous husbands, 3 children, and I guess she was receiving alimony even though she didn't have practical custody of any of them. On one vacation we went on, she basically kidnapped her oldest son because her father demanded he stay and go to football camp, but she took him on the trip without having legal custody. On top of that, her other 2 children were brats, and she was extremely entitled whenever anyone tried to address their behavior. One of them punched my brother, and when he pushed the child into a sand dune to prevent further harm but still retaliate, she yelled at my brother for shoving her defenseless kid. Meanwhile, she severely mistreated my cousin, my uncle's son, by trying to control everything he did, not allowing him on electronics or letting him go out with us. That was the only vacation she ever went on with us. My uncle ended up paying all her bills, helping support her children, and providing any other assistance she needed, even though she was already well supported. After he had his name on all of her accounts, he found her phone, which was full of messages and explicit photos. It turned out she had been sleeping with multiple people in the fire department, including 3 scores and more. Shockingly, no one in the department confronted my uncle, even though this had been going on for a month or 2 into the marriage. Even though they were married for less than a year, he still got stuck with her bills for a while, having to take her to court and fight everything. I think she also tried to get alimony from him, though he may have stopped paying eventually. Luckily, he found a nice older woman who is incredibly sweet. She is thoughtful, helpful, and enjoys spending time with the family. Her own children have already moved out, but she is caring toward my little cousin and helps keep my uncle organized. They aren't even married yet, but everyone already calls her aunt. A happy ending to a trashy story. Story 35. I was invited to a wedding by a friend who was a bridesmaid, Rebecca. It was a lesbian couple, Karen and Des, whom I had never met. At first impressions at the altar, they seemed relatively happy. As the night went on and people began giving speeches, there were a lot of playful threats aimed at Karen. People said things like, "Don't you hurt Des or I'll come after you." It was a bit uncomfortable, but most people laughed, so I laughed too. The night continued with plenty of drinking and dancing, and the couple left in a limo for their honeymoon. Before leaving, I overheard Dez's parents saying they liked Karen but weren't sure marriage was right for her and they were hoping Dez could change that. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I was talking with Rebecca, and she filled me in. On the limo ride, Karen and Dez had an argument over the way Karen had been dancing with a flirty bridesmaid. The next morning, they left for their honeymoon in Hawaii, with Dez still fuming over Karen's flirtatious behavior. Karen told Dez she was being paranoid and took her for a day of fun, sightseeing, and a romantic dinner. Dez began to think she had been overreacting. They are now married, starting fresh with clean slates. When they returned to the hotel, Karen jumped in the shower, and Dez noticed Karen's phone lighting up with texts. Assuming it was just friends and family congratulating them, Dez peeked at the screen and saw the beginning of a text from the flirty bridesmaid. Curiosity got the better of her, and she unlocked the phone to reveal that the bridesmaid had just arrived in Hawaii. It was ultimately revealed that Karen had planned to sneak off to sleep with the bridesmaid, again, as she had done multiple times right before the wedding. Confronted with Dez knowing the truth, Karen packed her things and left to join the bridesmaid at her hotel. Dez caught a flight home and filed for divorce. Several years later, Dez is happily married with a child and another on the way. As for Karen, who cares?
Story 36. About 4 months, my boyfriend's friend met a girl on Facebook last December, started dating her by Christmas, and secretly married her 3 months later. They kept it a secret and refused to tell anyone. The guy knew all of his friends disliked her, which is why he didn't announce the marriage. The girl said they couldn't tell their parents because of her daughter's father, who doesn't pay child support and isn't in the child's life. She still lives with her parents. All of their friends found out they were married when the guy left a wedding picture at work, and the boss showed it to everyone. They still never told their parents. This guy quit his job to work where she worked for less pay than he was making at his original job. He moved to a tiny town about 30 miles from work because she was supposed to move in with him, but she continued to live with her parents and made excuses not to spend the night at his house. He tracked her location and discovered she was going to another man's house for hours at a time, yet he stayed with her and never questioned her about it. She became pregnant, and he insisted the child was his. About 5 months into the marriage, they started fighting far more than usual, and she eventually left him. She finally admitted the baby wasn't his. He lied to all of his friends, saying she had miscarried, so he wouldn't have to admit he had married a manipulative woman. He told her parents they had gotten married as a small act of revenge, but I don't think he ever told his own parents or informed them she was pregnant. Story 37. That I know personally. 18 months. They had dated for quite a while, over a year, before getting engaged and never lived together because of their Bible Belt background. Both came from good families. His family was financially comfortable, while hers was on the house on the 12th hole of a nice golf course, vacation home elsewhere level. From secondhand accounts, they bought a modest townhouse in a suburb. He did his best to support them early in his career, in his early 20s, while she tried working for the first time independently of her family. There was a lot of fighting about budgeting and living within their means, and they ended up filing for divorce after a little over a year. They had no children. Side note 1, her family went all out for the wedding. Beautiful outdoor location, 5-piece string band, catered by a nice local restaurant, and more. The groom's brother told me he thought the total cost was about $60,000. This was in Midwest dollars over a decade ago. On the day of the wedding, however, a nasty storm blew through, soaking everything. Tornadoes touched down somewhat nearby, though the location was in a valley. I was an usher and literally carried multiple towels to wipe pooled water off seats while seating guests. The bride cried uncontrollably, and her mother had to console her enough to get through the ceremony. Side note 2. The groom remarried several years later to someone he seems much more compatible with. They had their first child several months ago. Story 38. My cousin married a really nice, hard-working man, but she wouldn't accept any ring except the biggest stone she could find. He took out a loan for the ring and the wedding, thinking it would be worth it. At the start of the wedding, my cousin had a meltdown. The dress she had chosen and had continuously fitted was not the right shade of white, and the flowers were the wrong color. Nothing was exactly as she had planned, even though she had put the entire thing together. They got married, and everything seemed fine. After the honeymoon, my aunt and uncle moved to the Caribbean to help install refrigerators and air conditioning in grocery stores. My cousin and her newlywed husband moved with them. She quickly grew bored of her husband and divorced him on the island. All of this happened within 6 weeks of the wedding. Story 39.
3 months. They had been a couple for 4 years before getting married. 3 months later, my buddy went out of town briefly, and when he returned, he found his wife had packed up and left while he was gone. She left a note saying she had made a mistake and wanted a divorce. On top of that, she emptied their joint bank account, taking about $10,000. Not sure why she thought she had made a mistake. Some things will remain a mystery. Story 40. A guy I worked with had been dating his girlfriend for 8 years. Her parents were Catholic and fairly strict, so I'm guessing they may not have slept together. They got married, and she moved into his place. 6 weeks later, she moved back home. He never explained why, but he didn't seem too upset. I met her once and was puzzled by what she saw in him. They seemed completely mismatched. He was about 10 years older than her, which means they must have started dating when she was around 15. She was very attractive, well-dressed, articulate, and worked in advertising. He was a bit rough-looking, a shift worker, and a keen hunter. No one at work was surprised that the marriage didn't last. Story 41. A girl I knew from school met a guy during her studies abroad in Australia. They were from different countries. They got together, and he moved back with her to her home country after graduation. They were engaged for about a year. During that time, she hooked up with one of my friends who was visiting for a few months, even telling him she would leave her fiancé for him. My friend returned to his home country, and the girl ended up marrying her fiancé anyway. A few months later, I saw her fiancé on my way back from work with his arms around a girl who was clearly not his wife. When I asked him, he told me that she divorced him shortly after the wedding, within 1 to 2 months. Apparently, she never truly loved him, which seems ridiculous to me since she had been happy and in love before hooking up with my friend. My friend, by the way, confessed to me right after it happened, saying he had done something horrible and even cried in front of me. He has always been, and still is, one of my closest friends. He is a solid guy, and even today regrets what happened back then. Story 42. My stepsister has a long history of hooking up with past drug addicts and generally bad people. This was the second guy she met that she stuck with for a while. They had 2 children together, and he had lived with me and my parents for a time. They eventually moved out, and I heard that they got married. I was somewhat happy for them, but deep down, I suspected trouble. They lived together for about 6 months with all of the children, and eventually my stepsister came to visit my parents and me without him. There was a big argument between her and my parents about his behavior, cheating, his messy lifestyle, barely showering, not cleaning. Basically, white trash. She finally decided he was too much trouble and that she wouldn't make that mistake again. She called him and told him she wouldn't be returning to the house. He is now living in his car, unemployed, and sees their children every weekend. I can't say I don't feel bad for him, but it's his own fault for getting involved in a situation he knew was doomed. Story 43. I wasn't at the wedding, but a colleague had a whirlwind romance, got engaged, and arranged a wedding. At the wedding, her father decided the groom wasn't paying her enough attention and was enjoying himself with his friends. He confronted the groom, essentially telling him he wasn't welcome in their family. The groom talked back, and the family told the bride she had to choose between her new husband and her family. So, she chose her family. And all of this happened at the wedding reception. Story 44. I can only speculate about the cause, but here's one story. A girl I went to college with married her college sweetheart a few years after graduation. He was a good guy with a good job and shared her cultural background, and she always spoke highly of him. She then went to nursing school and took a trip to Africa while working on her BSN. At this point, she and her husband hadn't even been married for a year. Suddenly, pictures of her with a random African man started appearing on her social media. It looked very suspicious. Sure enough, her husband filed for divorce, and a few months later, she married this other man, who was still in Africa even after she returned home for a while. She wasn't even pregnant by him. It just seems she completely lost her mind and really betrayed her first husband. Sadly, this wasn't the only instance that year. Another young woman went out of state for a month-long job assignment while her husband stayed in their home state with their child. He was completely supportive of her academic and career aspirations. What happened next? Her husband began disappearing from her social media posts, and she started posting pictures with a new man. She then flew home, collected her child, and flew back, effectively replacing her husband as the child's new dad. She is now engaged. I'm not exaggerating. This all happened in about a year. The difference here is that they had been together for a couple of years, but the pattern was strikingly similar. Granted, these husbands could have been unfaithful, but most normal people don't respond by having whirlwind revenge romances that look exactly like affairs. Story 45. About 20 years ago, my younger brother got married in a $100,000 wedding in July, only for his wife to leave him after 1 week. She had been having an affair with the best man. The first we knew they were no longer together was when we invited them to spend Christmas with us, and he said, "No, she's spending Christmas with her family in Los Angeles, so I'm just going to stay home." Huh? He admitted during a New Year's Eve phone call that she had bolted and had taken all the wedding gifts with her. Her father was a high-priced lawyer and started making threats when my cousin in Los Angeles presumptuously called to request the return of her expensive gift. Story 46. A family friend married a woman he had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with for years. They waited to move in together until after the wedding, at her request. They were both in their 40s and divorced, so I can understand why he got cold feet. Their marriage was annulled 2 months later. After he moved in with her, she started controlling most of his money. He had a bad spending habit and constantly called to check where he was, even when he worked late. I think he simply didn't realize how controlling she could be until they were living together. We all knew it wasn't going to last and warned him that she was a bit unstable. They would constantly break up over trivial things. My mom joked that maybe she was good in bed because her cooking certainly wasn't. Story 47. This one is going to be buried, but I have to share. My cousin's cousin, I was related on her mom's side, and this other cousin on her dad's, was someone I knew in high school. She was a year ahead of me and a really sweet person. She ended up marrying her best friend, often referred to in high school as one of the nicest guys anyone had ever met. Genuinely kind. Not a nice guy, in the fake sense. He was very cute, though not a football-playing type. It was his personality that made so many girls have crushes on him. Within a year or two of getting married, he completely flipped. Apparently, he started telling her he hated her, that he was never attracted to her, and other horrific things I can't fully recall. Granted, this is just one side of the story, but they did end up splitting up. I have to think it was some form of mental illness on his part. When our mutual cousin told me, I was floored. Considering his dad is one of the most mild-mannered English teachers at our school, it made the situation even stranger. Super sad. Story 48. I thought I had found the one. For me, it was love at first sight. I even told a friend that night I met her that I was going to end up married to her someday. We fell in love. She moved in after a month. And we had a great 4 years together, even relocating to a new city with new jobs for both of us. One day, I finally popped the question, and she said yes. We had a quick marriage at the city courthouse. About 6 to 8 weeks after getting married, she asked if it would be all right for her to go out with a guy from her new job like a date, her exact words. No. What the heck? She moved out, and I started divorce proceedings within the week. Within 8 months, she ended up marrying that guy. They had a couple of children before divorcing. 8 years later, she tracked me down, now living in another state, through a private investigator. She showed up outside my house and waited until I came out. I was completely caught off guard. She said she wanted to get back together, claiming she had been wrong 8 years earlier, and that I was the only man she had ever truly loved, the only one who had shown her real love. Nope, I was done. My dad, a white man, married a girl of a different race, a Polynesian woman. Her father whisked her away to some South Pacific island and forced my dad to get an annulment. He never saw or spoke to her again. He told me this after I got my divorce, I guess trying to cheer me up. I was kind of shocked that my dad had been married before my mom. This was in the 1950s when he was in the Army stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii. His marriage lasted only a couple of weeks, so it was very similar to my own experience. Story 49. This literally happened last night. I was on a business trip sitting at a Buffalo Wild Wings by myself having a beer to get away from the hotel for a moment, and the guy behind me was talking to his friend. He had just gotten married, but he didn't want to move in with his wife because his therapist said he wasn't emotionally ready. He was complaining that she didn't respect his boundaries and that he needed time to focus on himself. Her disregard for his boundaries included inviting her sibling for dinner at their place without telling him and refusing to put the cat situation up for discussion. Apparently, she has a cat, and he didn't know how to fit that into his emotional state. Poor guy. Maybe I'm misjudging him. Bish, why'd you get married? I guess they might work it out. Or maybe the Catholic Church will finally address child abuse in a meaningful way. Story 50. Apparently, an ex-friend got married last year. Only about 10 people showed up to the wedding besides the bride and groom, despite them having reserved a large hall. 3 bridesmaids and 7 family members. Only 3 people brought presents. Their food consisted of groceries from Kroger, like roast chicken, macaroni and cheese, and generic sodas. They divorced either 2 weeks or 2 months later, depending on who you ask. Also, the child she kept telling people she had with the groom was a toaster. I honestly cannot blame him for the divorce at all. I saw their wedding pictures recently, and nobody was smiling in any of the photos except for her. I'm not sure whether to feel sorry for her or consider it karma for all the bad things she did that led us to end our friendship. Story 51. This sounds unbelievable, but I swear it's true. My pastor's daughter and former close friend, let's call her Elle, married a guy after knowing him for just 1 week. They went to the courthouse and got married without telling anyone. This was already embarrassing for my pastor, but it gets worse. The marriage fell apart 1 month later. According to Elle's older sister, they were both drug addicts. He stole a large amount of drugs, went driving while high, got pulled over, and was sentenced to 5 years in prison on a plea deal. For about a month after he was out of her life, Elle seemed clean, and my pastor was proud, willing to blame the guy entirely. But as her former friend, I know Elle is a liar and narcissist, and I doubt she'll ever be anything but some kind of user. She was into drugs well before meeting him. The divorce papers came up, and he signed them wanting out. Yet Elle still wanted the marriage to work, even while dating a new drug user. Eventually, he finalized the divorce, much to her heartbreak, and that's why she's back on drugs. Story 52. My sister's friend married a guy after dating him for 1 year. Leading up to the wedding, she noticed some strange behavior, but assumed it was just nerves. The honeymoon was their first time away from home together, and he started acting erratically, so they had to return after 2 days. When she got home, she confronted his parents, who revealed that he had schizophrenia. He could only function normally if he stayed with familiar people and in familiar places with minimal stress. While they were dating, he never slept anywhere but his parents' home. The fact that he and his parents kept this from her was enough for her to stop the divorce papers from being filed. Story 53, 6 months. I moved to a new area after high school and became good friends with the neighbor's son. I quickly became part of his usual gaming group, and we grew close. He and his girlfriend had been dating for 6 years already, since about freshman year of high school. When he proposed, we were less than enthusiastic because they were constantly fighting. But he was a grown man and could make his own decisions. When it came time for the wedding party, she asked me to be a bridesmaid. I agreed because she and I had become close. She was fun to hang out with and always up for a good time. I even got my first tattoo with her. However, she constantly complained about him, how much he smoked weed, played video games, hung out with his friends, and how stupid she thought his friends were. The maid of honor had to sit her down and ask why she was getting married, and she said she wanted the husband, the child, the white picket fence, and all that. Then the groomsman and I sat him down, and he said he thought she was the best he could do. Despite some weak protests, they were both grown adults. They got married. Their first fight happened during the post-ceremony photos. Their marriage lasted about 6 or 7 months. I don't know the official reason for their divorce, though rumors speculated that she may have sabotaged their birth control, leading to an earlier than planned pregnancy. Cheating rumors also circulated. Honestly, I think it came down to living under one roof and realizing how incompatible they were. Sadly, I've lost contact with both of them. She went full mean girl, and he moved away. I still keep in touch with a couple of the groomsmen, and according to them, he's now in a genuinely loving relationship. Story 54. My cousin, an exceptional pediatrician and a hilarious family member, has a bit of a screw loose when it comes to marriage. His first marriage lasted about 20 years. He dropped the bomb about wanting a divorce right after a mind-blowing European trip, which, ironically, was his idea. His first wife wasn't exactly a stranger to quirks either, but still an exceptional physician. Honestly, why plan the dream European vacation just to ask for a divorce when you get home? Not long after, my cousin moved to another state, met a woman, wooed her, and got married. 3 months later, she packed up, got in her car, and left. Never looked back. Last I heard, according to my mom talking with one of his sisters, he got married again last year. He went all out with an extravagant wedding that wowed the guests. Exactly 1 week later, he filed for divorce. Story 55. My uncle got divorced right after his honeymoon. Reason? All of a sudden, his new wife got really lazy. She'd sit in front of the TV with this blank, fish-like look on her face and ask him to grab things that were literally just a few centimeters away. And this was during the honeymoon. Since he's on my mom's side of the family, Japanese, this kind of behavior was a major no-no. Apparently, being suddenly lazy was a deal breaker for him. Honestly, I was only 6 or 8 at the time, so my mom might have just told me this story to get me off the couch. If that was the real reason, it didn't work, because I'm lazy as hell too. Story 56. I think I'm watching this unfold in real time. A co-worker of my dad's, firmly middle class, only landed a professional job in his late 40s, married a 26-year-old rich girl. Her family is old money, owning and renting so much major city property it's ridiculous. Everyone gently told him to reconsider. She was already difficult when they were dating, assuming a middle-class guy could provide the lifestyle she'd always known. He bought a house, too small. Sold it, bought a bigger one he couldn't really afford, still not good enough. She constantly talked about their kids, they don't even have any yet, and how they'd never do the things he did growing up, riding ATVs, working on cars, because it's too dangerous. Meanwhile, this is rural Midwestern USA, where basically every kid grows up doing exactly that. Then she gets pregnant, and they have a baby. At this point, they still haven't lived together. Anytime the baby has an issue, she calls him to leave work and handle it. He isn't allowed to see his friends because some of them smoke or drink, and the baby shouldn't be exposed. He's being forced to give up both his social life and any reprieve, even though they're likely the only things keeping him sane. There are countless smaller stories too. Recently, a friend of his was getting married, and he thought a formal event would be perfect for her. She demanded a $10,000 dress and a $2,000 laser hair removal treatment. He said, "I can't afford that." Her parents paid, as they always do in these situations, which she resented, while he continued trying and failing to make her happy even once. It's bizarre, but mark my words, this divorce is going to be one for the ages. Story 57. They knew each other for just 6 months. Within that time, they got married, got pregnant, and were divorced before the child was even born. Everyone warned them not to marry. They didn't even know each other's middle names when signing the wedding license, yet they laughed it off. As expected, their true colors emerged. She's now left with a child, and he turned out to be an unfaithful jerk. She still says, "How was I supposed to know?" Maybe by actually getting to know him first? The worst part? They were both under the legal age to marry and had to get parental consent. Story 58. About 2 weeks, give or take. One of them was a teacher at my school, highly religious and one of the most stubborn people I've ever met, even to this day, 15 or so years later. The other was equally stubborn. They never stayed more than a couple of days together before marriage and never alone. They got married and quickly realized they couldn't stand each other's living habits. The breaking point? Toothpaste. The teacher liked squeezing the tube with his palm, holding it like a stick. His wife preferred squeezing slowly from the bottom. Neither would compromise. He got married near the end of the school year, after exams, and was divorced before school let out. He told us about it, attributing the failure to naivety, arrogance, and differences in personality. If they couldn't even agree on toothpaste, bigger decisions would be impossible. Since then, I've been a firm believer in living with a partner before getting married. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.